Hello, possibility seekers. It's Monique again. I'm back and with a very, very special guest and a very different format for today's podcast. Today, I feel like I'm doing a little bit of a public service announcement, and it's something that's really quite compelling from my perspective. A friend of mine, Jeff Brodsky, who hopefully will be listening to this podcast, introduced me to an organization by the name of Safe Horizon. And today, I am fortunate and delighted and honored to have the CEO of that organization with me. Let me tell you a little bit about Liz Roberts. Liz Roberts began her career as CEO of Safe Horizon in February 2021, following a national search. Liz is a social worker with more than 30 years of experience addressing the needs of survivors of violence and abuse. She first joined Safe Horizon as Chief Program Officer in 2010 and served as Deputy CEO from 2014 to 20. During her tenure at Safe Horizon, Liz was instrumental in launching several innovative programs while establishing field-leading training, supervision, and quality improvement systems. Under her leadership, the organization nearly doubled its budget and secured, wait for it, people, the 2018 New York Nonprofit Excellence Award. Previously, Liz served as Deputy Commissioner for the New York City Administration for Children's Services, where she developed innovative preventative programs, improved the child welfare system's response to domestic violence, mental illness, and substance abuse, and was also the founding chair of the agency's first task force on racial equity and cultural competence. Earlier in her career, Liz provided direct services to children and adults affected by violence and abuse as a grassroots shelter and hotline worker, children's advocate, and trauma therapist. She is a national expert in addressing the intersection of domestic violence and child abuse from a survivor-centered perspective and has held teaching positions at the Columbia University School of Social Work and Wheelock College. She's a graduate of the Bell and George Strell Executive Leadership Program at the Silberman School of Social Work and a 2017 recipient of the 50 Over 50 Award from the New York Nonprofit Media. She has presented widely on child abuse and domestic violence, co-authored numerous articles in academic journals, and has been quoted in numerous media outlets, including Good Morning America, National NPR, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. Liz received a master's in social work from Salem State University and a BA in social anthropology from Harvard Radcliffe. Welcome, Liz Roberts.
Well, thank you. That was a lot, hearing my whole bio read out loud. So I'm just, getting myself back in order here.
You're a badass. In my business, we call you a badass. So, You've always been. You just have to embrace what it is, So, I'm so honored to have you on, and I wanted to start with you telling the audience who's listening and or watching, what is Safe Horizon? What is their place in our area, and what is their place in our world? So please tell us about it.
So Safe Horizon is a nonprofit organization in New York City. We are the largest provider in the whole country of services to survivors of violence, abuse, and exploitation. So we work with all types of abuse and violence, from sexual assault and domestic violence to community violence and human trafficking. And we're there for survivors at every point of their journey to help them find safety, to help them heal, to help them get their lives back on track in the way that is meaningful to them. We touch about 250,000 New Yorkers every year.
Now, the statistic that when I was, my first year when I was a guest and attended the champion dinner, it was the statistic that blew my mind was when you're walking down the street, Liz, in New York, what is the possibility that the person I'm crossing in the street has been a client of yours?
So just in the past year, approximately 1 in 30 people you pass on the street have had some contact with us.
And that could be all of the things that we named, whether it's sexual assault, domestic assault, human trafficking, all of it.
Well, it could be any of those things. People reach out to us on our 24-hour hotlines. We house more than 800 parents and children every night in our shelters. We provide legal representation. We provide mental health treatment. And we do a tremendous amount of case management, safety planning, and advocacy.
And it's really sad to say that the need for your services has grown.
Absolutely. I would love to say that we're getting all of these issues under control, but that is not the case. We continue to see very high levels of violence in families and in communities, and we have a lot of work to do as a society to turn that around.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to kind of give perspective so we can move forward and have you share your vision and all of that. First, I want to understand how did you, as a Harvard Radcliffe graduate, end up at Safe Horizons? The journey is compelling, and I read it, and it was like, wow. And at the same time, how did you navigate from being where you started it to where you are today, and what was that like for you personally?
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey. And honestly, I'm just tremendously grateful for the career that I've experienced so far and hope to continue in the same path. I started out, it does all go back to my childhood. I did witness violence as a child. And it was a time when we didn't really talk about those things. And so I didn't have words. Nobody helped me make sense of it. I experienced it as my fault. I experienced it as a secret, a taboo. And so as I began to kind of break free from my family, approach adulthood, I became a fierce feminist because, my perspective was, oh, so there's this culture where men are allowed to behave this way. And women and children, are vulnerable and don't have the power to stop it. And so I got to college as a fierce young feminist, and I wanted to volunteer somewhere. I wanted to do something. And somebody referred me to the local domestic violence shelter. I became a volunteer. And, I loved studying. I loved being in school. I loved what I learned in college. But my one night a week shift at that shelter was the most compelling thing that I did. And I volunteered there every Thursday night for 4 years and just gained so much from the conversations I had with survivors over those years. They put me on the hotline as a freshman in college, and I would receive the phone would ring, I would pick it up, and on the other end would be somebody who was having the worst day of her life and who was in, desperate fear and shock and needing to decide what to do next. And the experience of having somebody in that situation trust me with their story, and then actually being able to offer some concrete assistance and being able to offer that non-judgmental ear that they might not have experienced ever before was just the most important thing I had ever done in my life.
That's a lot of responsibility for a young person and somebody that. And so, did you feel? I mean, this is sort of off script for a second, but did you had empathy for the person on the other end of the phone? You kind of. How does that show up? I'm sure they feel it, right? Like they know that you're real.
Yeah, I mean, the empathy always came naturally to me. I've always loved connecting with people. I've always loved supporting people who are who are upset about something. So that, in a way, was the easy part.
Right. What was the hard part?
Learning how to navigate impossible decisions that survivors often face and help them make their own decision about what the safest course will be today, tomorrow, next week. That was hard because, of course, I wished I had better tools.
What do you see a difference in the kinds of conversations you had as this young college person to what you're hearing your hotline volunteers saying, doing, and experiencing today?
I mean, that was the 80s. So we have learned so much since then. We understand trauma so much better than we did then, how it shows up, what the symptoms are, what works when somebody is coping with trauma. We understand the dynamics of domestic violence better, and we have a lot more options. We have more legal resources. We have more shelter and counseling resources. We have more protections in place. Back then, you could be fired if your employer found out that you were a victim of domestic violence. In a lot of places, at least, that's no longer the case.
Wow. Isn't that backwards or what?
It really, I think it's important. I have days where I'm like, why is this taking so long to change? And I have to remind myself, we've only been at this since the 70s. So prior to the 1970s, a man could beat his wife, he could sexually assault his wife, and it was legal. It was absolutely permissible. And so, it's taking longer than it should to change the norms, to change the laws, to change the behavior, but we actually made a lot of progress.
It's funny. I don't want to draw a parallel because I feel like it's comparing apples to oranges, and your line of work is so much more life or death than is mine. And at the same time, I've been having the same conversation with my women that I coach and the retreat that I did and the book that I'm writing. I'm having the same conversation I had when I was in leadership and the only female leader in a leadership team on a leadership team. And why are we still experiencing and having the same conversations 40 plus years later? It makes me crazy. And one of my guests reminded me, what you just did is exactly what similar. You reminded me that it's only been since the 70s. She reminded me that Cloverdale law, 1980s, 1984 to be precise, was the first time that we as women could get a loan in our own name without having to have a co-signer be our husband. We could have property in our own name. We could have all these things in our name without a male co-signer. And I literally had to stop myself and say, seriously, it's only been that long. So it's 40 years that we've had credit in our name. It's 50 years since we've had legal options if our spouses raped us. That's really quite something, isn't it?
Yeah. And, the law can change. What's on the books can change, but that doesn't always translate into what happens in court. And it definitely doesn't always translate into what happens in the home.
So so I didn't actually think we went a little bit off track in that. What are you seeing? Are you hearing the same conversations you had as a volunteer as what you are now hearing your volunteers go through? Is it the same?
It's a great question. And I have to say, nobody's ever asked me that question before. In some ways, the conversations are exactly the same because the experience of being a victim of domestic violence, terrified of the person who's supposed to love you and protect you and stand by you, like that experience has not changed. And the dynamics of domestic violence have not changed. The different tactics of control that abusers use have not changed. The only thing that's evolved is they have a lot more technological tools than they did when I started out in this field. So while I think there's greater social awareness, there are definitely more resources and options. The experience of going through it is still very much the same experience.
Yeah, unfortunately. So you said something, and now you say you're educating me on a lot here, that we are so much more, we are better informed as to what trauma looks like. What does it look like? Because I think most of my listeners, I can't imagine most of my listeners are as grounded, and hopefully they're not, as grounded as this conversation or you is in this space. So there's so much we don't know. So I'd like you to kind of unpack that for us.
Absolutely. So first of all, I would say up until the 70s, the only trauma that was kind of recognized was what happens to soldiers in the context of war.
PTSD.
So PTSD was understood as, specific to that kind of violence, that kind of circumstance. And it was only in the 70s and 80s that we began to see how PTSD showed up in people who had experienced child sexual abuse, child physical abuse, intimate partner violence, sexual assault as an adult. And now we really understand that. So one thing that we understand is that acute trauma and chronic trauma are different. That somebody who, has a relatively safe life and then experiences something kind of out of the ordinary that's traumatizing responds in a different way than somebody who has lived with violence for months or years or even decades, and that they need a different kind of support. We have a lot more tools to help people manage their trauma reactions. So we understand that just learning how to breathe deeply and calm yourself down can be such a powerful tool that helps people feel more in control, more able to face whatever the challenge is in front of them. Recognizing your triggers is something we've learned how to help people do. So, a trauma survivor might be like, why am I freaking out right now? And could realize, oh, it's because I just passed somebody on the street who looks like my old boyfriend who beat me. So learning to recognize this is what happened, this is what set off this reaction in my body, and to tell yourself that actually wasn't him, I'm okay, and calm yourself down. Those are things people can learn to do. And I think as a field, we didn't have the tools to teach folks to do that.
Right. So you made another comment about, like, in the not too distant past, we would be at risk of losing our jobs if our employers knew that we experienced domestic violence. Well, how has that changed today? Let's assume a woman is listening now and she is experiencing domestic violence and is afraid to come forward. What is the one thing that you want to tell her that she should be considering for herself?
That's such a great question and so important. And, there's been a lot of work done in the last 20 years to address this issue, because what we've come to understand is that survivors of domestic violence very often lose their jobs and very often suffer economically as a result of the abuse. And abusers, actively sabotage their partners' careers in so many cases. So many states and cities now have protections for domestic violence survivors. And I would say anybody in that situation should find out, are there protections where I live? And then many companies have developed really forward-thinking policies that say that, if you come forward because of domestic violence, we'll give you time off to go to court, to heal, to get medical and mental health care. We'll work with you on your safety. We'll alert security, or we'll transfer you to a different location where you feel safer. There's an understanding that it's actually the right thing for the individual and for the company to help that person recover and find safety. And many, many companies have become good at that. I would also say, though, before you rush in and tell your supervisor or tell your HR professional, this is what I'm going through, talk with an advocate. Think through what the safest course for you is.
What does that look like, Liz? What's an advocate for somebody who doesn't understand that language?
Yeah, so anybody can pick up their phone and call a local or the national domestic violence hotline. In New York City is 1-800-621-HOPE. That's Safe Horizons 24-hour hotline. And you don't have to give your name. You don't have to give your address. You can talk to an advocate who answers the phone about whatever is on your mind, which might include, should I tell my supervisor? It might include, should I get an order of protection? Or should I ask my abusive partner to leave the house?
What is the state of domestic violence around the country, and then particularly in our space, the New York metro area? What does that look like for people to really contextualize for themselves?
So I would start by saying domestic violence is more prevalent than any of us want to believe it to be. And even as somebody doing this work all these years, I can still be surprised by how common it is. Approximately 1 in 4 American women will experience intimate partner violence in her lifetime. And that stat has not budged for decades. So it's continuing to happen to young women at very high rates. The state of it is, on the one hand, we have greater awareness, we have better legal options, we have better social service options, we have better policies. And on the other hand, it continues to run rampant through our families and communities and, causes such damage to survivors, to children who witness it.
Yes. And it crosses socioeconomic barriers too.
Yeah. I think a lot of people kind of distance themselves from it, thinking that doesn't happen to people like me. And that's just unfortunately not the case. Intimate partner violence is prevalent in all communities, regardless of income, regardless of race and cultural background, regardless of religion. It affects same-sex couples at the same rate that it affects heterosexual couples, which is something, we didn't know 20 or 30 years ago, but is crystal clear now.
Really?
Yeah. It is about gender, and it is about male privilege, and it isn't only about that.
That actually blows my mind.
Yeah, I think it's a little known fact.
Huh. Yeah, that is not something I would have predicted you to say, or something that I would have predicted that I would have known for sure. Wow. What is it that, we have a lot of women leaders listening to this that have been interviewed on the show and on this podcast. And what is it that they can do themselves to make a difference for your organization and or the state of domestic violence today?
I mean, that's the good news. There is so much that women in positions of leadership can do to make a difference. And I think if we all do our part, we really will turn the numbers around in the next generation. So first, I would say any woman in a position of leadership, look at the organization that you're leading. Do you have the awareness and the policies in place to support employees who might be victims of domestic violence? Are your HR and staff and managers trained to recognize the warning signs? Are there policies that give people the time off they might need to go to court or get care? Do you have the ability to transfer somebody to a different location if they're experiencing domestic violence? What can you do around safety for somebody who might be being stalked or harassed in the workplace? So that's the first thing I would say for women leaders. The second thing I would say is, does your organization or do you have a partnership with an organization like, say, Horizon? That those corporate partnerships are so important to the work that we do. We cannot do this alone. We need everybody in society to step up and be a part of the response. And there is a domestic violence service provider in every community in the country. Maybe not every town, but every county, every area has coverage from a provider like, say, Horizon. We're here in New York City, and we would love to connect with new corporate partners in the city and in the surrounding communities because it makes all the difference to have those partnerships. You can raise awareness. You can get your employees involved as volunteers. You can provide financial support. You can bring us new connections and relationships that move the organization forward.
Yeah, those are critical areas, I imagine. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, your board is so heavily connected to they bridge the gap between their companies and your organization, I think, and they do that beautifully. Is there anything else you want to just in terms of just to close out that portion of our conversation? Is there something that you think the listeners or viewers would be like, oh my God, I would have never thought that is the state of domestic violence today? 1 in 30 people in New York City, the 800 people that you house overnight every day, the 1 in 4 American women will experience intimate partner violence in their lifetimes. That blows me away. Is there something else that's kind of like the cherry on top? I
think I just want to say to everybody listening, first of all, you may have abuse in your life or in your history. And many of us are really good at compartmentalizing that. And so even even hearing this conversation may stir things up for your listeners. And I would encourage anybody that happens to know that you don't have to carry that alone, that there's lots of support out here. And then the other thing I would say is I think we still are not doing nearly enough to support people in our family circles, in our communities who are experiencing intimate partner violence. There's still this idea that family business is none of our business. And so I think people see, they see a bruise or they observe an interaction between, somebody in their family and their, new intimate partner that makes them uncomfortable, but people are afraid to say anything. And we continue to hear from survivors, my family never noticed, my family never asked, or, when I told them, they blamed me. They said, I told you that guy was no good, or, you made your bed. And that's what needs to turn around. Survivors need to know that when they turn to their families, when they turn to their communities, that they actually will be believed and supported.
That's a great one. So Liz Roberts, what is something that nobody knows about you? Or something that not many people know about you?
I always have to ask myself, which answer will I give to that question? What I was thinking about actually is I've lived in big cities my whole adult life. Boston and New York City. I live in Brooklyn now. I'm actually like a huge nature lover. I took this is a funny story from when I was in middle school. I had this amazing teacher, and she had us take these tests of like aptitude and interest, what your career should be. Oh, I love that. Well, I took one, and apparently it was an amazing test. It said I should either be a marine biologist or a social worker. And at the time, I was like, marine biologist, yes. Social worker, no. Now I'm a social worker. But there's a part of me that still wants to be like out on the ocean studying dolphins.
Oh my God, that's great. Well, maybe you could do some social work on the dolphin. I don't know. It's a bad joke. I'm not going to even go there. That's hysterical. They told you that early on that was what you're calling.
And it wasn't until after I became a social worker that I put the two together.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, I'm not exactly sure how you reconcile a social worker with marine biologist and why the DNA is the same. I can't reconcile that for myself right now, but it's kind of funny. Wow. And then the other question I ask all of my guests, because I love this, and I'll tell you what the other people say. What would you tell your 30-year-old self knowing what you know today and I won't disclose your age, but
59.
You're so brave. I do that. And people go, why do you tell people how old you are? I go, because I want them to think my skin is so good. No, I'm kidding.
I would tell my 30-year-old self that this is a marathon, not a sprint. It's okay to pause. It's okay to have fun. It's okay to take care of yourself. You're not going to turn this problem around overnight. So do what you need to do so you can stay in it for the long haul.
That's brilliant. Most people say it's going to be all right. I would tell my younger self, it's going to be all right. What you said is so timely because the conversation around self-care is not selfish is so high on what I'm finding myself saying to younger women.
Yeah, we didn't know. And I think that's something else we understand better now. If you don't put your oxygen mask on.
Oh my God, Liz, that's what I say all the time. Those are my exact words. I say you have to put your oxygen mask on first.
It's such a good metaphor. I think it just clicks for people. It's like, oh yeah, if I can't breathe, how am I going to take care of somebody else?
Exactly. All right. Well, we're coming to the end of our time. What do you want to leave the listeners with? What do you want to tell them to do? This is your show, your call to action. What do you want?
Well, come to safehorizon.org or reach out to me at liz.roberts@safehorizon.org and become part of our movement, become part of this work. We can make it better for our children, for our grandchildren, if we take it on. We would love to have you get involved. On our website, you'll find information about how to give to Safe Horizon. You'll find information about how to help a friend who might be going through intimate partner violence or something else traumatic. You can help us, raise awareness through your social media channels. Help us make this change in society.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Liz Roberts. You have been a blessing to have on this podcast today. Thank you. Possibility seekers, you've heard it. You listened to it. You learned it. Please do something with the information that you've gotten today. I thank you for listening. I thank you for caring. Make it a great day. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to Possibilities with Monique de Maio, where we unpack life as a female mover and shaker. If you like the show, please consider liking it, or better still, subscribing to it and leaving us a rating. It truly does help. Also, you can pick up my book, The 7 Secrets to Creating a Life You Love, a practical guide for women in leadership. You can find the book, other episodes of this podcast, and how to stay in touch at moniquedemaio.com. DEMAIO. I look forward to seeing you again soon. With gratitude, Monique.